If the definition of leadership is getting people to follow you, then how has followership been left out of leadership theorizing for so long? My name's Dr. Bailey Benedict, and today we're going to talk about followership theory, understanding the role of followers in leadership. To overview, we'll be covering different perspectives on followership, including leader-centric views, follower-centric views, and relational-centric views. Then we'll be introducing followership theory. This presentation is based on Uhl-Bien and colleagues' 2014 paper titled Followership Theory, a review and research agenda that was published in the Leadership Quarterly. The basic argument of followership approaches to leadership is that leadership is a co-created process. And when we say co-created, we mean that social and relational interactions between people are what makes leadership possible. Without followers, there's no leader. So leadership can really only occur if there's a followership that is giving some form of deference to a leader. Followers give a leader identity to someone and accept a follower identity themselves. Therefore, if leadership involves actively influencing others, then followership involves allowing oneself to be influenced. Because we haven't been paying a ton of attention to followers for so long, our understanding of leadership is incomplete. Before we dive into those perspectives on followership, I want you to take a second and reflect on the question, how has and does society view followers? And then, thinking back to what you know about leadership theories, how have leadership theories viewed followership? Early leadership theorizing was heavily focused on a leader-centric view, where leaders are power-wielding actors who move or direct followers into action. They're the motivating entities. And then followers are the recipients or the moderators of the leader's influence. Followers dutifully carry out the will of leaders without resistance or initiative. It's not a very favorable perspective on followership. A lot of Taylor's early works suggested that managers were superior and employees were inferior. Leaders were superior, followers were inferior, and that followers must be directed or controlled. They're mentally sluggish and are otherwise subordinate. So those early perspectives are what informed trait and behavioral theories to leadership. There's very little research that's addressed follower traits or even the interaction of leader traits and follower traits in leadership research. The basic idea is that leaders cause followers to act and that leaders can motivate higher performance by displaying care and concern for followers. But at the end of the day, we're looking for the characteristics and behaviors that are going to get followers to do what leaders want them to do. The perspective on followers in contingency theory is a little more positive. Followers are one of the situational factors that leaders need to consider and manipulate when deciphering how to approach a leadership scenario. And leaders do involve followers in decision making, but only in specific circumstances and only as much as is necessary to gain their cooperation. Charismatic leadership theory focuses heavily on the leaders too. There, the sensitivity to followers is key to the success of charismatic leaders. That person's magnetic approach to interacting with followers may change depending on the audience they're interacting with. Despite being leader-centric, transformational theory has a more positive perspective on followership. Leaders build followers' commitment to achieving goals and inspire them to perform. Therefore, leaders focus on followers' needs and growth, transforming them from, unfortunately, lesser valued followers to leaders, but still, followers are a heavier focus. Improving the relationship between leaders and followers is a focus, but it's still highly leader-centric. The leader is doing the inspiring, and without the leader, followers are not inspired. You can imagine the kind of perspective that a transactional leadership theory would have on followers if they feel they need to be punished or rewarded in order to get the job done. Let's turn to those follower-centric views. On leadership. There we see leadership as a social construction. Leader emergence is generated in the cognitive, attributional, and social identity processes of the followers here. Followers are thinking through the situation, who's involved, what we can attribute to which people, and thinking about what their individual social identities are, what the identity of the group is, and what the group needs in a leader. And that's what determines which leader emerges and who is followed. Follower-centric views of leadership lean into the idea of the romance of leadership. And the romance of leadership is that we basically romanticize our leaders And what that comes down to is the fundamental attribution error, which is that followers over-attribute the successes and the failures of the group to the leader because that leader is the focus of the attention. In a follower-centric view, instead of romanticizing that leader, maybe we should be romanticizing all of the followers that make the leader's direction happen. Social identity theory offers a follower-centric viewpoint that also trends into relational viewpoints on leadership, because there, people derive part of their personal identity from belongingness to a group. Therefore, leadership effectiveness depends on followers' group identification. So the more I feel my personal identity comes from belonging to a group, the more effective the leader leading that group will be. People conform to leaders who embody the group's values. And those different values offer prototypes of the kind of people and behaviors that are involved in this group. Leaders gain influence by being seen as the most prototypical member of the group. I'm involved in a sip and stitch group that gets together to crochet and knit on Sunday mornings, and the leaders of that group are the people who have the most yarn, complete the most projects, talk the most about knitting and crocheting. They're the most prototypical members of the group, and we kind of turn to them for their leadership. So leadership emerges from our group dynamics about figuring out what we all value as a group, not just the traits of the leader or the position they might hold. With leader-centric and follower-centric approaches to leadership, we're still heavily focused on individual people. Relational-centric views offer a more holistic understanding of leadership. There, leadership is a mutual influence process between leaders and followers, not just top-down, like in leader-centric, or bottom-up, like in follower-centric. Leadership, therefore, emerges through a complex system of shared goals, culture, and constraints. Because it's shared, leadership is about collaborative authority. There are a few relational-centric views on leaders that I want to talk through just to put you in the mindset of what it looks like to focus on relationships when it comes to leadership. In Lord's connectionist view, leadership is shaped by both leader and follower identity work. The leader and the follower are figuring out who they are and what they value, and working together to construct the group's identity. Therefore, followers influence the leader's behavior and their self-concept, and leaders do the same in influencing the behavior and self-concept of followers. With Follett's Power Within, leadership is about collaborative authority. Managers take orders from employees, while employees carry out the orders from managers. Authority emerges not from a hierarchy, but from this shared control that the leaders and the followers have over each other. Hollander's relational view sees leadership as an exchange that's built over time. Followers grant leaders influence in return for respect and legitimacy, and we emphasize reciprocity over rank. Leader-member exchange is a very popular relational-centric view on leadership, and there, leadership depends on the strength of the relationship between leaders and the followers. So when leaders and followers have high-quality exchanges and interactions, we have greater trust, mutual support, and we're able to form and carry out shared goals. Leader-member exchange still tends to center the leadership in the process, but members are heavily involved in the exchange. Just a few more relational-centric views on followership. With charismatic relationships, charisma is co-created and is not just a leader trait. The traits of the follower shape their relationship with the leader, and charisma is seen as situational and dependent on follower receptiveness. For instance, some people who are charismatic are very self-deprecating. Some followers may think that's hilarious and really respect the self-deprecation, and other followers may think, if you don't believe in yourself, why should we believe in you? Klein and House's Charisma on Fire sees charisma as a spark from the leader that brushes with flammable material, which is the followers, and needs environment, which is the oxygen. Charisma on Fire emphasizes that social contagion and shared social emotional engagement are essential in leadership. For instance, a leader has to get fired up about something to help followers get fired up about it. If followers are fired up about something, it will help the leader catch on as well. The toxic triangle is another very popular relational-centric view of leadership and followership. Here, destructive leadership arises from toxic leaders, susceptible followers, including conformers and colluders, and conducive environments. The toxic triangle steps back and takes a system view on leadership and followership, where when things go wrong, destruction stems from the whole interaction. So problems with the leaders, the followers, and the situation. Now that we're thinking about followers in different ways, let's turn to followership theory. Followership approaches on leadership privilege the role of followers in the leadership process. With followership theory, leadership is co-created through leading and following behaviors, and it's not just about calling someone a follower. It's about what people actually do when they choose to follow or not follow a leader. Some of the things that followership theory addresses are follower roles, follower behaviors, and the outcomes of following in certain ways. There are two primary lenses to studying followership, and they address two different questions. The first is what types of followers exist. The second is how is leadership co-created through following. Whereas role-based views investigate followership as a role and a set of behaviors or behavioral styles, constructionist views study followership as a social process that's necessarily entwined with the leader. If we started out with leadership-centered views of leadership, role-based perspectives on followership kind of reverse that lens. So they're focused on the formal roles of followers and how followers are causal agents. What do they do that make things happen? So we're looking at follower traits and styles, generally seeing how their behaviors can influence leadership outcomes. With a constructionist perspective, we're looking a lot more holistically at that process of leadership. We're focused on the behavioral interactions where leadership emerges when someone chooses to follow. Therefore, we have an identity process of claiming an identity and granting an identity that shapes the leadership. And leadership then becomes an interaction that occurs between people and not just the title of leader that we assign someone. To make sense of the followership process, we often want to group different types of followers together by their traits and behaviors. There are a few different authors that have created some common follower typologies where if you're looking into followership, you're going to encounter these typologies. And they offer frameworks for a different way of understanding how followers think, behave, and engage or don't. In Kelly's typology, there are followers who are alienated, conformist, pragmatist, passive, and exemplary. In Chalif's, we have followers who are partner, implementer, individualist, and resource. With Kellerman, we have isolates, bystanders, participants, activists, and diehards. In attempting to understand followership, we also have three categories of follower behavior. One are obedient behaviors. Those are when followers carry out directives, defer to the authority, and take a hierarchical approach to interacting. We have resistant behaviors. Those are either passive or active pushback, constructive dissent, and challenging norms, assumptions, requests. Then we have proactive follower behaviors. Those are constructive, engaged, co-productive, where we're working together with the leader, and feedback seeking. So with these behaviors, sometimes a follower does what's intended for them to do. Sometimes they participate in figuring out what's intended for them to do, and other times they push back against what's been asked of them to do. Followership theory argues that followership deserves attention. Followers can influence leader behavior and burnout, trust and relationship quality, organizational ethics, and the overall effectiveness of the organization. Leadership isn't just something a person has, it's something that leaders and followers create together. And without strong and thoughtful followers, leadership breaks down. Most people spend their entire career as a follower in some way or another. So great organizations should really develop followership and not just leadership. I encourage you to think about how can we as organizational leaders focus more on followership in leadership as opposed to just leadership. We've seen so many different perspectives on the importance of followership that it becomes even more prevalent to think about why, if leaders can't exist without followers, has followership been left out of leadership studies for so long? How can we turn the lens and focus more on the followers?